thank you so much, Jesse, for that run through of what I've done with my life over the last couple decades. I am one of those lucky people who moved back home and wanted to. So I'm living in the home in Pasadena on a hillside lot on West Pasadena that faces Mount Wilson and to the east. So I'm lucky enough to get sun all the way during the day, but only until about 5 or 6 o'clock at night when the sun goes over the hill to the south, and consequently then it's just indirect bright light for me for the rest of the evening. And that's when I really go out into the garden and enjoy puttering around and figuring out what I haven't yet taken care of. And every couple weeks I do submit a new blog onto my website. And so I invite you to play along with me in seeing what's happening in my garden, and consequently what may or may not be happening in your garden, and therefore some of the reasoning of what's happening when, and what to do about it if we need to. The blog that I sent out last night deals with the promise and the threat of this tremendous heat that we're supposed to be getting starting Monday, where it certainly will be in the mid 90s supposedly, and even over 100 a couple days. So there are things that you need to do immediately, like water everything deeply in anticipation of that, and to have perhaps some shade cloth available, even if it's something minimal like paper bags or cheesecloth, that because all of our plants have been growing so very nicely for this very, very long spring that we have had with great weather. And so this is really the first, I think we had one day where it got into the 90s. But this is going to be the first time that these plants have felt really attacked by this tremendous heat and intense sun. So because it's so sudden, and because it's a good 10-15 degrees above what the plants have been used to for so many months, it will be something that the foliage may burn, certainly react negatively to this tremendous heat. So do try to provide something for those plants. Also on my website are gardening events like the announcement of this presentation, but also everybody else sends me their notices of their presentations. Up to this point, of course, most everybody has been via Zoom. And also job opportunities. There is a monthly tips section, which is a long description of the many kinds of things you can be doing each month of the year. And also the news items. When I find intriguing articles online, I post them under the news section, and that ends up being, I hope, some entertaining garden kind of news for you. If you want to receive notices on my email list for the job opportunities or the garden events or the news or my blogs, then please sign up via the email. And that way you'll get those notices as soon as I get them posted. So again, if you have any particular questions, put them in the chat, and Jesse will read them to me at the end, and I'll make up something intriguing for you. So here we go into container gardening. Okay. So I am going to be discussing container gardening generally. Most of it will have to do with outdoor gardening, but everything is extrapolated for indoor house plants and that kind of thing. So, and I will be making comments all the way through about any distinctions between outdoor and indoor. And I think the main one up front is that indoor gardening is those plants are going to have to deal with a lot less light, especially direct light, than those that are outside. So this can be good or bad on both sides. It's always a matter of matching the plants to the conditions that you are able to provide. And that certainly is outdoors, but it's also indoors. So this picture is demonstrating to you the many different kinds of containers that you can use for plants. And you really want to match the container to what the root zone is and the amount of light and amount of water that those plants are going to be requiring. So for example, here we've got a little tiny plant. It's probably only a 6-inch pot, but it, especially when our heat gets above 80, to say nothing of above 90, this little pot is going to be drying out pretty quickly. All of these here, except the wood one over here, are terracotta, and that is a good thing and a bad thing for your choice of plants. It does allow the potting mix to breathe very easily, and so there's less tendency for your plants to die because you have drowned them, because there's so much water going into it and not being able to breathe through the sides of the pot. On the other hand, this is a much more natural type growing condition, just because in regular soil, it also, through the air pores in the soil, it can breathe as well, all those roots. So here we've got some lettuces, which are fine. Their roots only go down maybe 6 inches at the very most. But of course, this is going to dry out much more just because it's standing up above, and then it's probably only about a 4-inch depth to this particular pot. These strawberries are in this 6-inch deep container. It's got very thick walls, so that helps at retaining some of the moisture. And there is actually a berry on here, so at least that plant is very happy. This tomato plant, this is about a 2-foot container, both depth and width. And that's great for a tomato, whether it's a cherry tomato, which is going to get to be a huge plant, where you need to provide the trellising for it, because it could get up to 6 feet. Or if it's just going to be 1 or 2 patio tomatoes that are only going to get to be 18 or 24 inches tall. But both of them have root zones that do need to have that amount of space. And in the handout, if you were able to print that out, and Jesse will send it again for those of you who did not get it, it has a selection of plants, how big a container and how deep the roots go. So consequently, that is your guideline to how the size of the container that you need to choose. So why or why not should we utilize containers? Well, some of the advantages are that on a patio or balcony, fence or steps, anywhere where the light level matches the plant needs, you can be moving them around very easily to either follow the sun or avoid direct sun. Perhaps between you get morning light, but there's you don't want it to get that beating sun in the late afternoon, so you would move your container. You can move them when they're in bloom or they're fruiting or when they look particularly attractive, and then move them out of the way when they're just kind of looking like a green bunch of leaves. Disadvantages include that they are restricted. That plant is captive in that container. So if it's a small container, it really doesn't have much activity able to pull up in fertilizers or water, and it's going to be drying out much more quickly. And this becomes a real problem during the summer. Containers are sensitive to the weather just because of their location as well. The heat, the cold, the wind, the ventilation, any of that may or may not be very good, but it's stuck out there and it is not planted in the soil, which means that buffers all of those elements. You will need to frequently irrigate and fertilize the plant, again, because it's captive to being in that container. It can't send out more roots out into the native soil in order to pick up more either moisture or fertilization. And because it's trapped, you will need to root prune it and repot it at least every couple of years, because that potting soil empties of its nutrition and its moisture value at least every other year or so. So many kinds of containers, but what you need are drainage holes or a pot in a pot. Now, especially indoors, of course, you will need to provide a base for whatever kind of a pot, or even a tray that has pebbles or horticultural charcoal or whatever it is in there to catch the irrigation water that comes through the pot into the holding container. This pot is one of those really big glazed pots with no drainage hole. And this rose is planted in a smaller container that fits right in here so that it can have the benefit of the beauty of the pot, but it still can be sufficiently watered so the water goes through it. You just have to remember to dump the water in the bigger container after you've watered it several times for the benefit of the plant. Because anytime it will be sitting in water, then that potting mix will not be drained, and consequently, you may end up rotting the entire root zone. The size of the container, bigger is always better just because it enables or allows more space for that root zone to be able to develop. Deeper is better than wider, because the depth, just because of gravity, the water will sit right down to the bottom and then maybe be reabsorbed by the pot. However, if it's wider, it's going to have a lot more evaporation, and consequently, if you remember those, like here, it's going to be, when it's a shallower pot, all of this is going to be evaporation possibility, as opposed to a deep pot, which has a much smaller area to be evaporating. The material and the color makes a difference. Darker colors are going to absorb more heat, whether it's in the black plastic gallon-sized container that many plants come in from the nursery, or if it's a light colored plastic or the clay pot. So that is going to make a difference. Hanging baskets like these teapots or these shoes are going to mean that you're going to have to be frequently watering. And this, again, is going to be problematic in the summer. You may have to be out there several times a day just to keep that potting soil moist. And of course, you can always put your garden on your car. This is my collection of succulents. Years ago, I purchased a lot of different kinds of succulents. Between the texture and the color and the patterning and the size and the actual form of the plant, if it's something different, I want it immediately. And so when things are very young, they can go in these smaller 6-inch containers. Even this guy is only 2 inches deep. And consequently, with the beginning of our COVID experience, that was the first project I did. This was the collection about 5 years ago. And as of this last year, all these plants had grown tremendously. So I ended up repotting the entire collection. And it does make great fun because what you can do is try to match or contrast the coloration of the plant with the particular pot. And this is, of course, your great excuse to buy pots that you are fascinated with and then trying to match it with a plant. So how much sun do container plants need? And this is where the tremendous distinction is between houseplants and outdoor plants. If the foliage, if what you are doing is growing the plant for the foliage, like lettuces, like, well, begonias like this one, it needs only 6 hours of sun direct daily. If it's going to be flowers and fruit, because then the plant is having to develop a lot more, like it's not only growing just the foliage, but then it's putting out the energy to produce flowers and then get those flowers pollinated and then set the fruit and then develop the fruit. If you've grown tomatoes, you know that that can be a good month or 2 months beyond just growing the plant. And in that case, those plants need a good 8 hours or more daily. And of course, this is what's going to be difficult to provide indoors. So unless the plant is a shade plant that is going to go ahead and provide some flowers and even fruit. Bright shade, where you don't get any direct sun, but it is still bright light for a good portion of the day, is going to be where your houseplants can come outdoors during the summer or be successful as houseplants. For example, my African violets this whole last year, they have been on a baker's rack right outside my kitchen so that I can enjoy them through the kitchen window, but also they are always in protected. There's no direct sun that comes to them there. And so with the mild temperatures that we've had for all these months, they've been quite happy. What kind of soil mix do I use in a container? You don't go out to the garden and dig a bunch of dirt and put it in a pot. You don't want to use anything that is, shall we say, real dirt. There are disease spores, there are weed seeds, and it is quite heavy compared to the potting mix that is going to be much more advantageous for your plants. So use a high quality sterilized soil-less mix that does have a lot of organic matter in it. And I'm using this as an example, not as a suggestion of the brand name. What you want to do is fill the, let me start at the hole at the bottom of the pot. You do want to have good drainage for your container garden. However, you don't want to put a batch of like those peanuts or the pots. When you break a pot, you break it into pieces and use that for additional drainage at the bottom, because what you are doing is lessening the amount of space that those roots can get to. So what I recommend is at the bottom, if you have one or more holes in the bottom of the pot, that you purchase some of the windows, the plastic window screening. Now I know there's a roll recently. I had to purchase some, and there's a roll that was at Ace Hardware that I think it was like 3 feet by 2 feet, and it was, I think, $3 or $4. And what I did was I cut that up into many strips and then individual pieces that were about 2 inches square. So I put down that on top of the hole, and then I put one piece of broken clay pot right on top of it, just to hold it in place, and then have one hard piece on top of that window screening, and then put my potting mix in there. You're using that window screening because then all the small particles of the potting mix will not just run out of the pot. And you're using that single piece of broken pot just laid right on top of it, kind of just to anchor it in place as you fill it with the potting mix in there. And I know some people love using the styrofoam peanuts in there, but I can't understand why they are putting a heavy layer, couple inches, and then on top of the pot is where the potting mix goes. They have lost that couple of inches of where those styrofoam pieces are, because the water will come here and it will indeed drain out, but the roots are not going to go into that because it's too much air. They need the moisture of the potting mix. So you've filled your pot here with the potting mix, and you've left about an inch of space at the top, and you've planted your plant in there, and then you've watered it in thoroughly. If when you do water it in, if it sinks down a little further, then just add more of the potting mix, but so that you are completely done when there's only about an inch of space up the top here, because that is what is going to be your watering space every time you water that container. So what plants can we plant? And this is where you'll want to refer to the top part. I'll hold this up. See this whole batch of examples of the depth of the pot, and then the vegetables themselves. For example, a 12-inch deep container, you can plant beets, bok choy, carrots, garlic, leaf lettuce, onions, radishes, spinach, strawberries, and Swiss chard. Now they're each a different space between each plant, but all of those roots of all of those vegetables go down a maximum of, say, 10 or 11 inches. You always want to leave another couple of inches beyond what the roots actually will grow to, just so that they have the space to be able to extend as far as they possibly can. Genetically, you know, they are going to grow to it, or they can grow to a depth that they genetically are bred to do. The 18-inch container depth is going to be beans, broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, cucumbers, eggplant, peas, peppers, and squash. And for a really deep container, 24 inches, blackberries, blueberries, potatoes, and tomatoes. So please ask Jessie for that handout if you'd like that as a referral. So what we've got here are tomatoes, and this is in a grow box, which you pour the water in here, and the bottom is full of what's it called? Well, it's a fiber that is absorbs moisture, and then you put the fertilizer in there as well. So it's not open to a lot of evaporation. So it really reutilizes all the fertilizer and all that that's in that water. This is lemongrass, and there are some plants like lemongrass that love to be root bound. So don't feel that you have to be continually repotting some of these because they are much more productive when they are root bound. Here's a little pea. It's, oh, I don't remember the name of it, but this is literally only 8 inches. And so you're getting peas on this teeny tiny little plant. Here's a bit of a raised bed set on some grass, and it has a batch of the lettuces and maybe some sage here. This, of course, will all grow straight down below where the board is into that, but it's utilizing all that ground space to be able to utilize for its root growth as well. Here's a couple of leeks that are planted into a concrete block edging at one of the community gardens, because leeks have no problem with the heat, no problem with the dryness, as long as you water them every once in a while. Here's a great way to use the rain gutters. You see the water starts here in this big watering trough that has the spigot in there, and the water comes up and is released over into the first row. And because of the angling of each row, the excess water from one row will keep going back down to the next one, and then the final one goes back into the big trough, so that it definitely is recycling and utilizing every single drop of water. Fruit bushes, fruit trees, and ornamental trees. Be aware of how you may be changing your environment. This is a grape that was in this great big huge pot. This is one of those like 24-inch pots. Before they put the superstructure on this, this was getting lots of direct sun, and it produced grapes. Now that the roofing is on there and it blocks the sun, it makes a very nice foliage plant, but there's no grapes. It just doesn't get enough direct sun in order to go ahead and produce the grapes. Here is a pot that has a kumquat tree, and then the surface area around the kumquat tree trunk is just more succulents that, of course, don't take much water at all. However, they finish the pot in terms of providing all that nice green variations and texture variations of the plants. And this ornamental, very tiny pot, but you see it has the wire here for the drip. So it is provided enough water, at least to keep it growing and staying pretty much the size that it is. Flowers, alphabetically here, we've got begonias, geraniums, tulips in little teacups, ornamental teacups. Hydrangea, now this is in the sun right now, but this gets only early morning sun, and then about 10 o'clock, the sun moves over what is the roof line for this house, and then it goes back into its bright light for the rest of the day. So certainly with the very large pots, enabling those root systems to get very extensive, and the watering and the fertilizing, it gets a beautiful display. Here's little mini, well, this is the mini rose here, but it also has the, maybe those are more mini roses. I was thinking that it was the, oh, what's the name of that? It's moss rose. But anyway, a small container. This is about a 12-inch pot, both depth and width. And it's right on the edge of a raised bed at a community garden. And bromeliad made a nice hairdo for this statue, which of course doesn't take much water at all. It's more of a epiphytic. It lives in the crux of trees and just gets the nitrogen that flows by in the air. So how many plants do I put in a pot? Well, the bigger the pot, the more you can add depending on the nature of the plants. This one is an artichoke, and those of you who've grown artichokes know that it can last for a good 10-15 years. What will happen, here's the little baby artichoke just forming here, as it gets larger and it develops and it either goes into being the flower or it gets harvested and eaten, the top greenery will die back, and next year it'll put up new shoots at the base. Ooh. And consequently, that's one reason you need a very large growing space, because while the main stalk is going to die, it is going to put other ones up from the root, and consequently you will have need to provide a good amount of space and the fertilizer and the watering to keep it happy. So what you can, here, these are all annuals around here. Here's one basil, here's the purple basil, some oregano, maybe some lettuce, or maybe it's all herbs in here, looks like it. So some of these are annuals, some of them are perennials that you can just trim back to have a nice fluffy base to it of the oregano leaves, and just utilize it that way. The slide itself here, this picture doesn't show you the full depth of the container, but the point here is that the artichoke has an extensive root system, and it's pretty much the bottom half of the container. All of these herbs have root systems that are only maybe 5-6 inches deep. Consequently, they are at the top half of the container. So in terms of the utilization of the water and the fertilizer, they are not competing with one another, because the little ones are in the top half, and the big plant that is going to last from year to year is at the bottom half of the plant. And you can plot that kind of growing out in your regular garden as well. Okay, do I use seeds or transplants? And the distinction between the two is that seeds, some of them take a long time to germinate. Some of them germinate very quickly. So you really should use the seeds that germinate and grow very quickly, like lettuce, like radishes. Perhaps the carrots you will put amongst everything else, but they can take up to 3 weeks to germinate. But when it's in combination with all these things that do germinate quickly, they will ultimately come up, because the soil mix is going to be nice and moist because you're watering everything there. And consequently, the fact that the carrots take a little longer, you'll just need to keep track of them or have them interplanted so that you're not conscious of them particularly. Transplants, again, plants that are already started that you haven't had to spend the time getting them from seed for the maybe month or 2 that it takes them to get to the point of transplant size. So eggplant, pepper, tomatoes, and most flowers. So do both. For example, here in this picture, I've got the transplanted lettuce that I bought in a 6-pack, but I've also sown the seeds right next to it. So this one's going to give me food immediately, and then after another month, all of these little seedlings can be transplanted and then start bearing, if you harvest just the outer leaves of each plant, you can have them growing for the rest of the spring or summer, fall, or winter. And generally, you do want to have in containers vegetables that are high yield, that you get lots of food for the amount of effort and the visual space that your container is going to provide. So beans, beets, broccoli, carrots, lettuce, peppers, radishes, squashes, and tomatoes are all good choices for containers. How frequently do I water? The larger, deeper container does moderate soil temperature, and that's another benefit for it, because then it keeps the root zone really moderated, so that it's not super hot and dry and then it gets soggy, wet, moist. Double potting does moderate even more, because either the space, or if you've used potting mix in between the 2 containers, that is an insulation value to it. And this example here of progressively smaller pots, you water it up here, and then the water that doesn't get used comes out the base, and then it keeps the next layer moist. Anything that isn't used goes down to the bottom layer. So you, in fact, are getting the best use out of the amount of water that you provide, because it's always going to keep going on down to the bottom layer. Now, strawberry pots are somewhat of this same kind of attempt at keeping it all moist, but they don't have the individual layers between the pots. And what they have is that the water that you put at the top immediately goes down to the bottom. So the bottom ones are always drowning and the top plants are always dried out. So I don't recommend those strawberry pots, unless it's going to be like for succulents, which do just fine with basically no water except a couple of times during the summer. Your finger is a great measure, so just stick your finger in at each level and you'll see where it needs more water. And I think each one of these joints is about an inch. So if you stick this down, if it's dry here and it's dry here, but it's moist here, you could wait a little longer, like another week, to water it. But if it's already dry all the way down to your entire finger, then go ahead and water. And water slowly, because you want the water not just to go to the edge of the pot and run down the side and out. That means that the entire mix inside is already too dry and it's just shedding the water, rather than what you want to do is massage it a little, cultivate it a little, so that it does, with a little bit of water, it does absorb it, and then gradually it will absorb enough for the entire root ball to get hydrated again. During the summer, I do encourage using a drip pan underneath, because the water, like if it had a drip pan at the bottom here, by the time you water all this and there's water coming out, it will be reabsorbed within a day or two back up into the pot. If it's more than a day or two, then dump the water. But that way it precludes that problem where it may be pretty dry soil mix and consequently it runs straight through. This, having some of that reservoir at the base, enables it to reabsorb it. But during, well, I was going to say, as it says here, not during the winter. However, of course, this winter we didn't have any rain. Relatively, I think we got 4 inches over the whole entire rain season. So in that case, I would have kept the drip pan underneath. And how frequently do I fertilize? I'll get to that at the end here. The major nutrients are NPK. Nitrogen gives you the green foliage. Phosphorus, the P, gives you stronger roots. And potassium really provides for the entire plant itself, including the flowers and fruit. But of course, all of them, well, the phosphorus and potassium are much more across the board, whereas the nitrogen is really to get the plant growing in its green foliage. So for example, if your tomato plant is super green and really lush, but it doesn't seem to put out any blossoms, then chances are you're giving it too much nitrogen, and you should hold back on that, and perhaps too much water. Whereas when it has enough of the phosphorus and the potassium, then it goes ahead and sets the flowers and the fruit, and you end up having what you were really growing that tomato for. Trace nutrients are also very important, and this is why having an organic fertilizer, which includes many of those things, is really important for the plants. It's not just the big three that you need to be feeding your plants with. So in the organic fertilizers, the fish emulsion, seaweed, kelp, blood meal, and bone meal are all part of the contingent there that ends up being providing for a much healthier, well-rounded, shall we say, meal for those plants. And I do recommend either a quarter strength fertilizer every other time you water, or finally, what I have ended up doing is making a solution that is an 1/8 strength every time I water. That way I don't have to worry that I haven't, and then the third time I use just water. That way I don't have to wonder, did I water last time or not? I just know that I am providing it all the time for the plants, and they will pick up what they need when they need it. Okay, that's the information part. Now's the fun part of just looking at some of these crazy containers. So if any of you are old enough to remember when coffee came in I was going to say 5-gallon, was it really 5 cans? This person saved all the cans, painted them blue, mounted them, and with a watering system to it. So it's a consistent design look amongst the entire wall here. I think all of us at one point have had an extra carafe from our coffee maker. So just the right amount of passage of air through the lip here to provide a bit of a terrarium. Here is a upside down lamp, like over a dining table or something, that has been flipped, and instead of the bulbs in the center, it's got each one for a plant. Here's a cut lumber, a tree cut down that they rotted in the center, so they put potting mix in there and added plants. Here's oversized cups used as large containers, and a wonderful swan with succulents in it. Here's a basket, straw basket, that of course would rot out within 1 year if it had all the herbs just planted right in it. But what this gardener has done is lined it with 4mm plastic, and then makes sure that she waters on the inside of that plastic, and not very much, only enough to keep the potting soil moist. And she may have 1 or 2 drip holes at the very bottom. Here's some chard that's in a packing box. Sunflowers in a bathtub. Of course, it has its 1 drainage hole. A bureau. Truck tires. And of course, these have been sold for many, many years at Home Depot to buttress the hillside. More pots, the similar kinds of pots, and the cut trunks to make a design with the consistent use of the blooming plants. A toolbox for someone who knits. This is a great way to provide, especially for succulents because they don't care if they are dry for extended periods of time until you get to water it again. An old-time wheelbarrow, now as a planting barrow. Cars planted. Here's a pumpkin with the glue stick, putting succulents on there for the Halloween and Thanksgiving. More tires made into a ladybug. Jeans. A wall framed succulent collection. And hairdos. Shoes. And this, of course, is everybody's fantasy of what our container garden should look like. This is not my photo. This is in Italy somewhere. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Yvonne. We do have one question in the chat here from Deborah. She was wondering about recommendations for covers or netting to keep critters like squirrels out of vegetable growing in outdoor containers.
Yeah, well, you and everybody else in the world. I don't know. There are many on the, let me find it on my other computer here. The University of California has the Integrated Pest Management website, which is absolutely tremendous. And I will give you the, okay, it's ipm.ucanr.edu. So what it stands for is Integrated Pest Management at the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources.edu. And when you get to that home page, there is a square for, there's 4 different categories. And one is home, garden, turf, and landscape pests. Then there's agricultural pests, natural environment pests, and exotic and invasive pests. So if you click on the home and garden one, there are several like pests of the home, structures, and pets. But on the right-hand side, there's a quick links. And one is Pest Notes Library and also Quick Tips Library. And both of those have PDFs, just versions on many of the insects and diseases and all that stuff. So what are we looking for here? Squirrels. Okay. Well, I don't see one for squirrels. Oh, no, it's under ground squirrel. So sometimes it has, you know, another word to it, like caterpillar is leaf feeding caterpillars. So you have to go truly through the whole thing. So it has an overview of all kinds of basic information about what the critter does, what it's attracted to, and then what to do about it. So in many cases, it's just going to be excluding it from your garden, which of course is going to be very hard. But sometimes just putting a cage, what do you call it? Chicken wire cage over the entire plant. And that way it'll literally keep it out. But that's the best resource for you is the IPM and then ucanr.edu. So just spend a lot of time wandering around that on what you can do also, besides that pest notes and the quick tips, is that you go to like flowers or fruits or vegetables. So you can come at it from the point of view of like tomato. What are the billion problems that you can have with tomatoes? You can come at it from the point of view of the particular plant, or if you know what the pest is, then come at it from that one. So it's just a tremendous resource and gives you very many ideas about how to proceed with it.
Thank you, Yvonne. I have a follow-up question with that. Joy wants to know, how do you keep slugs out of containers?
Bugs out of containers?
Slugs.
I'm sorry, what?
Slugs.
Oh, slugs.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, same thing. Look up slugs and snails on here. If they are outside, what they are looking for is the moisture. So it may be that you're just keeping it too moist. And that reminds me of, I wanted to be sure to alert you as houseplants. If you have those fungus gnats, you know, those little things, the little black things that fly up when you water or handle the plant, it's because you're keeping it too moist, and that top quarter of an inch of soil is breeding them. The adults, excuse me, the adults live there, and then they set their eggs, and because it's continues to be so moist, then they have the little ones coming up. So what you can do is scrape that entire top surface clear, like half an inch, throw that away, put it in a plastic bag in the trash, closed plastic bag. And ideally put some worm compost on there, but just keep it much less moist, because it is a fungus. The gnat lives on the fungus that is developed right on the top surface because it is so very moist. And if nothing else, repot the entire pot and wash off all the leaves and stems and roots in order to make sure that all those eggs that have been laid there are now washed down the drain, so that you're not reinfesting the potting mix. I know that wasn't a question, but it frequently comes up, so I thought I would volunteer it.
Okay, thank you. Don't have any other questions. Does anyone else have a question? We don't have too many people in the room today, so if you'd like to turn on your mic and ask a question, now's your chance.
Okay, I guess everybody's happy with their containers.
Exactly, that's perfect. So Yvonne, thank you so much for your presentation today. And of course, if you have more questions for Yvonne later on, the Gardening in LA email address was in the chat there, and check out her website for more. And I also put my email address in the chat if you're interested in joining the Pasadena Grows list, email list, to find out about more programs. So again, thank you, Yvonne. Everyone have a great day.
Thanks so much. Bye for now.